The Galaxy Council chamber sat in silence as the holographic display showed another colony burning. Director Ventara watched the flames consume the settlements on Borth 5 and felt something she had not experienced. In her 3 centuries of service, fear, real, and cold fear that wrapped around her hearts like ice. The Krell Empire had destroyed 15 Council worlds in just 2 months, and their fleets showed no signs of stopping. Every diplomatic attempt had been rejected. Every peace offering had been answered with weapons fire. The Council's defensive forces were stretched across 700 systems, and they were losing ground every single day. Big Star stood beside the director, and his forearms moved nervously as he reviewed the tactical reports. He was the Council's best military advisor, and even he could see no path to victory. The Krell had numbers, and they had fury, and they had a desperation that made them fight like cornered animals. 3,000 years of peace had made the Council soft. Their ships were designed for exploration and science. Their weapons were meant to disable, not destroy. Against an enemy that wanted total conquest, they were like children with wooden swords. Facing battle-hardened warriors, the emergency session had been going for 16 hours. Representatives from the major species argued and debated and proposed strategies that everyone knew would fail. The Quellan ambassador suggested retreat to the core systems. The Vryn delegate proposed surrendering the outer territories. The Calfani envoy recommended building new defensive stations which would take years they did not have. Ventara listened to all of it and felt the weight of 700 civilizations pressing down on her shoulders. Then Big Star leaned close and whispered something that made her blood freeze. The quarantine world. The restricted system. The humans. Ventara's immediate response was a sharp and absolute no. The protocols existed for good reasons. Humanity had been marked as too dangerous 207 years ago, when the survey teams had observed their final Great War. Nuclear weapons scorching their own planet. Millions dead in conflicts over resources and ideology and ancient hatreds. The Council had made the merciful decision to seal Earth away. Let them sleep. Let them heal. Let them never know what they had missed. But Big Star pulled up the old military surveys on his datapad. Human history was soaked in blood. They had been fighting wars since before they built cities. They had weapons that terrified the survey teams. They had tactics that made even the Krell look restrained. Every century they invented new ways to kill each other, and every century they got better at it. If the Council needed warriors, then Earth had warriors. The question was whether unleashing them would be worse than letting the Krell win. Ventara called for a vote, knowing it would tear the Council apart. Half the representatives refused on principle. Humanity was too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous. Opening that cage might doom the galaxy worse than the Krell ever could. But the other half looked at the burning colonies and the casualty reports and made the cold calculation that desperate times required desperate measures. The vote came down to a single deciding voice. The Methrin delegate, a young female named Sora, who had lost her entire family to a Krell raid 3 weeks earlier. She voted yes. The Council authorized 1 ship to be sent to Earth, 1 diplomatic envoy. 1 chance to convince the humans to help. If they refused, the matter would be dropped forever. If they accepted, then the Council would deal with the consequences later. Envoy Lathan volunteered for the mission despite knowing he might be flying to his death. The last real survey of Earth had been 50 years ago, and it had shown them still recovering from their wars, still divided into competing nations, still burning fossil fuels like primitives. Surely they could not have advanced much in such a short time. The Harmony's voice dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and Larthan immediately knew something was wrong. The quarantine field was still active, broadcasting its warnings to stay away, but beyond it the system was alive with activity. Massive stations orbited the outer planets. Ships moved between the moons of Jupiter. Energy signatures blazed from Mars and the asteroid belt. This was not the primitive recovering world the Council remembered. This was something else entirely. Larthan guided his ship past Neptune, and the sensors started screaming warnings. Weapons locks. Targeting systems. defense satellites that had appeared from nowhere. A voice crackled over the communications channel, speaking in crisp, efficient English, demanding identification and purpose. Larthen responded with the prepared first contact protocols, explaining who he was and why he had come. There was a long silence. Then the voice told him to proceed to Earth orbit slowly with weapons powered down, and any aggressive action would result in immediate destruction. The Harmony's voice limped toward the blue and green planet, and Larthen saw the defensive grid that surrounded it. Hundreds of satellites, dozens of armed stations, and ships. Military vessels that looked nothing like the Council's explorers. These were warships with angular hulls and weapon ports and designs that spoke of function over beauty. They escorted him down to a parking orbit above North America and told him to wait. On Earth's surface, Admiral Kate Morrison stood in the command center beneath Colorado and watched the alien ship on her screens. She had been preparing for this moment her entire career. Humanity had detected the quarantine field 90 years ago. They had studied it and tested it and finally understood what it meant. Someone out there had locked them in. Someone had decided humanity was not ready for the stars. That knowledge had changed everything. The nations of Earth had unified not out of love but out of spite. They would show whoever was out there that humans could not be caged. The military buildup had happened in secret, beyond the range of whatever sensors maintained the quarantine. Luna became a shipyard. Mars became a training ground. The asteroid belt became a weapons factory. Humanity had spent a century preparing for the day when whoever put them in the cage would come back. Kate had expected invasion or judgment. She had not expected a plea for help. President Linda Grant appeared on Kate's screen from Washington, and her expression was carefully neutral. They had rehearsed this scenario 100 times, but the reality was different. An alien species wanted humanity's help to fight their war. The question was what Earth wanted in return. Kate ordered the communications team to establish a proper channel with the alien envoy. When Larthen's crystalline face appeared on the screen, she kept her expression cold and professional. He explained the Krell threat and the Council's desperate situation and the offer of technology and membership. Kate listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked the one question that mattered. Why now? Why, after 2 centuries of silence, did the Council suddenly want to talk? Larthen hesitated, and Kate saw the truth in that pause. They had been watching. They had been judging. They had kept Earth in a cage, and now they needed what the cage had created. Kate told Larthen she would need to consult with Earth's government, and the channel went dark. She turned to her staff and saw the same mixture of anger and opportunity in their eyes. The galaxy had locked humanity away like dangerous animals. Now they wanted to let the animals out to fight their battles. The irony was sharp enough to cut. But it was also the chance humanity had been waiting for. The chance to prove they belonged among the stars. The chance to show the galaxy what humans could do when someone finally gave them permission to stop holding back. The meeting took place 48 hours after Larthen's arrival, and humanity had used every single minute to prepare. President Linda Grant sat at the head of the table in the secure conference room 300 feet below Washington. Admiral Kate Morrison sat to her right in full dress uniform. Secretary of State Paul Henderson sat to her left with his datapad displaying every piece of intelligence Earth sensors had gathered about the visitor. Around the table sat generals and scientists and linguists and economists. Humanity's first contact with an alien species would not be handled by one person or one perspective. It would be handled by the full weight of Earth's unified government, LAR. Then appeared on the main screen from his ship in orbit, and his crystalline body refracted the light into rainbow patterns that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But everyone in the room saw past the beauty to the desperation in his posture. He began his presentation with a detailed history of the Galaxy Council and its 3,000 years of peace. He showed maps of Council space spanning thousands of systems. He displayed images of hundreds of species living together in harmony. Then he showed the Krell invasion and the burning colonies and the casualty numbers that climbed into the millions. President Grant listened without expression. When Larthen finished his pitch about technology sharing and council membership, she leaned forward and asked the question that had been burning in her mind since Kate's first report. How long had the council been watching Earth? Larthen's hesitation told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. 207 years. Every moment of humanity's recovery from the nuclear age. Every step toward unity. Every achievement and every struggle. The council had watched it all from behind their quarantine field like scientists observing lab animals. The room went very quiet. General Frank Butler's hand tightened on his pen hard enough that it cracked. Dr. Helen Park's face went pale, then red with anger. Paul Henderson closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath. Kate Morrison's expression did not change, but her jaw clenched. President Grant kept her voice level and calm when she spoke again. So the council had kept humanity locked in their own solar system for 2 centuries. They had prevented Earth from reaching the stars. They had made the decision that humans were too dangerous to join galactic civilization. And now they wanted humanity's help to fight a war they were losing. Larthen tried to explain the reasoning. Humanity's violent history. The nuclear weapons. The wars that had killed hundreds of millions. The council had made what they believed was a merciful choice. Let Earth heal. Let humanity mature. Perhaps in another 1,000 years they would be ready. But President Grant cut him off with a gesture. She told him that humanity did not need another 1,000 years. They did not need the council's permission to be ready. Earth had unified precisely because they had discovered the quarantine. They had spent a century building and preparing and advancing specifically to prove that whoever had caged them had made a mistake. The president stood and walked to the wall screen showing Earth from orbit. She told Larthen that humanity would consider his request for military aid. But there would be conditions. Full disclosure of all council technology. Complete star charts of council space. Immediate membership with full voting rights. Access to all trade networks and diplomatic channels. And most importantly, no more secrets. No more watching from the shadows. No more decisions made about humanity without humanity's input. If the council wanted Earth's help, they would get it. But they would also get Earth as a full equal partner, not as a junior member, not as a probationary species. As equals or not at all, Larthen agreed to take the terms back to the council. The transmission ended and the room erupted into heated discussion. Half the cabinet wanted to tell the council to solve their own problems. The other half saw an opportunity that might never come again. Admiral Kate Morrison waited until the arguments died down before speaking. She reminded everyone that regardless of their anger toward the council, there were billions of innocent civilians dying in the Krell invasion. Species that had nothing to do with the quarantine decision. Children and families being killed because their government made bad military choices. Humanity had a chance to save lives and prove their worth to the galaxy. They could do both things. They could be angry and helpful at the same time. The vote was unanimous. Earth would send military aid to the council. But they would do it on their terms, and they would make sure the galaxy understood that humanity was nobody's weapon. They were partners or they were nothing. President Grant authorized the immediate deployment of the First Fleet under Admiral Morrison's command. 20 ships, 4,000 personnel. The best that Earth had to offer. They would show the Council and the Krell and every other species in the galaxy what humans could do. When they finally got the chance, the preparations took 3 weeks. The ships were already built and the crews were already trained, but integrating alien technology and star charts took time. Dr. Helen Park led the science team that reverse-engineered the Council's faster-than-light communications. Engineer Carlos Ruiz adapted Earth's weapon systems to work with Council targeting protocols. Linguist Amy Foster created translation algorithms that could handle 700 different languages. Every department of Earth's government worked around the clock to make sure the fleet would be ready. Commander Lisa Jang spent those 3 weeks reviewing every piece of tactical data the Council had provided about the Krell. She was Earth's youngest fleet commander at 34 years old, and she had earned her position by being the best strategic mind in the solar system. What she saw in the Krell's attack patterns troubled her. They were aggressive, yes, but not mindlessly so. They hit supply lines and communication hubs. They avoided heavily defended positions. They used overwhelming force against weak targets. This was not the behavior of savage conquerors. This was calculated military strategy. The kind of strategy you used when you were desperate and could not afford to lose. Lisa brought her analysis to Kate Morrison, who read it carefully. The Admiral asked Lisa what she thought was really happening. Lisa said she thought the Council was not telling them everything about why the Krell were invading. Kate agreed. She had come to the same conclusion. But they would not know the truth until they got out there and saw for themselves. That was fine. Humanity had plenty of experience dealing with people who did not tell the whole truth. They would go to Council space and fight the war and figure out what was really happening. Then they would decide what to do about it. The first fleet launched on a cold morning in March, 20 ships rising from their hidden bases beyond Neptune and jumping to faster-than-light speed in perfect formation. Earth's first interstellar military force heading into the unknown. President Grant watched from the command center and felt pride and fear in equal measure. Pride that humanity had come so far. Fear that she had just sent 4,000 people into a war they did not fully understand. But there was no turning back now. The cage was open. Humanity was loose in the galaxy. And whatever happened next would echo through history for generations to come on the Harmonies. Voice Larthen watched the human fleet jump away and felt his own mixture of emotions. Relief that Earth had agreed to help. Worry about what he had just unleashed. The Council had been afraid of humanity for good reasons. Now they would see if those fears were justified. He began composing his report to Director Ventara. The humans were coming. They were advanced and organized and angry. They had agreed to help, but they had done so on their own terms with their own conditions. The Council had wanted warriors. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. Larthen just hoped the galaxy was ready for it. The first fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Calendra Prime space, and every sensor on the Council station locked onto them immediately. Director Ventara stood in the observation deck with 100 other Council members and dignitaries who had gathered to witness humanity's arrival. They had been expecting a modest show of force. Perhaps some converted civilian vessels with basic weapons. Maybe a few hundred crew members trying their best to look professional. What came through the jump point made every single person in that room fall silent. The Unity led the formation, and she was a monster. 2 kilometers of dark gray hull bristling with weapons that the Council's computers could not even fully categorize. Railguns that could punch through a moon. Missile batteries that carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Point defense systems so dense that nothing short of a direct hit from a capital ship could penetrate them. The ship's design was all angles and aggression. No wasted space. No decorative elements. Every centimeter built for one purpose, which was to fight and win. The 19 ships that followed her were smaller but equally deadly. Carriers loaded with fighter craft. Destroyers with torpedo tubes. Support vessels packed with electronic warfare. Systems and shield generators. The formation moved with precision that made the Council's military advisors exchange worried glances. Each ship held its exact position. Each adjustment was calculated to the centimeter. This was not a fleet that had been thrown together in 3 weeks. This was a military force that had been training for years and was now showing the galaxy what it could do. Big Star watched from beside Director Ventara, and his forearms trembled slightly. He had recommended bringing the humans into this war. Now he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Admiral Kate Morrison requested permission to dock, and her voice over the communications channel was calm and professional. The Council granted permission, and 20 human ships moved into their assigned berths with the kind of coordination that usually took months of practice. Kate came aboard the station 6 hours later with an escort of 20 Marines in full combat armor. The Council members who saw them in the corridors stepped back instinctively. These were not the soft civilians that populated most council species. These were warriors who looked like they could tear through a bulkhead with their bare hands. The formal meeting took place in the council's grand chamber with representatives from 50 major species in attendance. Kate walked in wearing her dress uniform with her gray hair pulled back and her medals displayed across her chest. She did not bow or show deference. She simply walked to the center of the chamber and waited for the council to begin. Director Ventara welcomed her and thanked Earth for answering the call for aid. Kate nodded once and asked to see the current tactical situation. No pleasantries. No diplomatic small talk. Just straight to business. The holographic display lit up showing the Krell invasion in all its brutal detail. 40 systems taken in the past 2 months. 300 billion civilians displaced. Military casualties approaching 10 million. The Krell fleets were pushing deeper into council space every day, and the defensive forces were crumbling. Ventara explained that the council had been trying to negotiate, but the Krell refused all diplomatic contact. They explained that the council's straw Teggy had been to create defensive lines and hold territory, but the Krell kept flanking them. They explained that casualties were being kept as low as possible because the council valued every life. Kate listened to all of it, with an expression that grew harder with each passing minute. When they finished, she walked up to the tactical display and zoomed in on 3 specific systems. Her fingers moved across the holographic controls like she had been using council technology her entire life. She highlighted supply routes and staging areas and logistics hubs. Then she turned to face the council and told them exactly why they were losing. Their strategy was completely reactive. They were letting the Krell choose when and where to fight. They were spreading their forces thin, trying to defend everything, which meant they defended nothing effectively. They were worried about casualties, which meant they hesitated when they needed to strike hard. Commander Lisa Jang stepped forward and began pointing out the Krell's weak points. Their supply lines were overextended. Their forward fleets were operating at the edge of their logistics capability. If the Council hit 3 specific systems simultaneously, they could cut off 15 Krell battle groups and force them to retreat or starve. The strikes would need to be fast and surgical. No long bombardments? No siege tactics. Just jump in, destroy the targets, and jump out. Minimal civilian casualties. Maximum military impact. The council chamber erupted into argument. Half the representatives were shocked at the aggressive strategy. The other half wanted to know why their own military advisors had not thought of this approach. Ventara called for order and asked Kate if she really thought such strikes would work. Kate's response was blunt. She told them that Earth had been fighting wars for 5,000 years. Humanity had learned every lesson about warfare the hard way. What she was proposing was basic military strategy. The fact that the council had not already done it showed exactly why they were losing. Then Envoy Larthan stood and spoke the truth that everyone had been avoiding. He told the council about the quarantine. He told them that Earth had been isolated for 2 centuries specifically because humanity was too good at warfare. He told them that the council had kept humans locked away out of fear, and now they needed that very thing they had feared. The chamber went silent. Kate's expression did not change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. She turned to face Director Ventara directly and asked if it was true. Had the council been watching Earth for 200 years? Had they kept humanity trapped in their own solar system because they were afraid? Ventara could not lie. Not here, not in front of the entire council. She confirmed it. Yes, they had quarantined Earth. Yes, they had watched humanity's development. Yes, they had made the decision that humans were too dangerous for galactic society. The justification had seemed reasonable at the time. Now, with human warships docked at their station and human warriors standing in their chamber, it felt like the worst mistake the council had ever made. Kate was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to the observation window and looked out at the council station, at the thousands of species living in peace, at the civilization that had thrived for 3,000 years on the foundation of diplomatic cooperation. She turned back and her voice was soft, but everyone heard every word. She told them that humanity had a saying, "Do not start a fight you cannot finish." The Council had started something when they broke their own quarantine. They had woken up the one species they were most afraid of. Now humanity was here and they were going to finish what the Council started. They would stop the Krell invasion. They would save the Council's colonies. They would prove that humans deserved a place among the stars. But when the war was over, there would be a reckoning. There would be a very long conversation about trust and respect and what it meant to lock an entire species away. Like dangerous animals, the Council agreed to let humanity lead the military operations. They had no choice, really. Their own strategies had failed and the Krell were not slowing down. Admiral Kate Morrison took command of the combined fleet with the authority to make tactical decisions without Council approval. Commander Lisa Zhang was given access to all military intelligence and communications networks. The human forces were integrated with Council ships and suddenly everything started moving faster. Orders were clear. Objectives were specific. The defensive posture that had defined the Council's approach for 3,000 years was replaced by something they had never really experienced before. Offensive warfare conducted by people who understood it in their bones. The first strike happened 72 hours later. Lisa Zhang led a mixed force of human and Council ships into the Xandros system where the Krell had established their largest supply depot. The attack was brutal and efficient. Human fighters screened the approach. Human destroyers took out the defensive platforms. Human Marines boarded the supply stations and set demolition charges. The entire operation took 4 hours from start to finish. When the human fleet jumped away, the Xandros depot was a cloud of debris and the Krell supply line was cut. 0 human casualties. Minimal Council losses. The kind of victory that changed the momentum of a war. News of the strike spread through Council space within hours. Through Krell space too? War Master Drakner received the reports in his command ship and studied them carefully. He was impressed despite himself. These humans fought with a ferocity his species could respect. They used tactics the Council had never employed. They took risks that made sense. For the first time since the invasion began, Drakner felt something other than confidence. He felt concern, because if the humans could do this once, they could do it again. And if they could do it again, the entire Krell offensive might collapse. The human victories kept coming and each one was more impressive than the last. Commander Lisa Zhang became known throughout Council space as the tactician who never lost. She hit 3 more Krell supply depots in 2 weeks. She destroyed a major shipyard in the Thorian sector. She led a raid that captured an entire Krell command ship with all its intelligence data intact. The Council forces that fought alongside her learned quickly that humans did not waste time with elaborate plans. They identified the target and they hit it hard and they moved on to the next objective, simple, brutal, effective, but Admiral Kate Morrison was not celebrating. Something about the entire situation bothered her and she could not quite identify what it was. The Krell were fierce warriors and they fought with desperation, but their tactics suggested something more than simple conquest. They were not destroying infrastructure when they could have. They were not enslaving populations when they could have. They were taking territory and then immediately fortifying it like they expected something worse to come after them. Kate had seen this pattern before in Earth's history. This was not the behavior of invaders. This was the behavior of refugees. She called a private meeting with Captain Don Palmer, who commanded Earth's stealth reconnaissance ship, the Shadow Runner. Don was 40 years old with sharp features and sharper instincts. He had spent 15 years in Earth's intelligence services before joining the fleet. Kate trusted him more than anyone else to find the truth when people were lying. She gave him orders that were not on any official record. Take your ship into Krell space. Do not engage. Do not get caught. Just observe and find out what we are really dealing with. Don accepted the mission without hesitation. He had been thinking the same things Kate had been thinking. The Shadow Runner slipped through Krell territory like a ghost. Dan's crew were all specialists in reconnaissance and they knew how to stay invisible. They monitored Krell communications. They tracked fleet movements. They stayed far enough away from any engagement that no one knew they were there. What they found changed everything. The Krell were not expanding for resources or glory. They were running. Behind their territory in the outer rim systems there was nothing. No communications. No energy signatures. No life signs. Just dead space where entire civilizations had been pushed deeper into the outer rim despite the risks. The Shadowrunner sensors picked up strange readings. Entire planets stripped of their atmospheres. Stars that were dimmer than they should have been. Space stations torn apart by something that left no debris patterns. Whatever had done this was methodical and thorough and completely unstoppable. Don recorded everything and then ran back to Council space as fast as his ship could go. He had seen enough. The Krell were not the enemy. They were victims. Kate reviewed Dan's data with a sick feeling in her stomach. She immediately requested an emergency meeting with Director Ventara and the Council leadership. No public announcement, no official channels, just the people who needed to know the truth. When she showed them the recordings from the outer rim, the room went silent. Ventara's crystalline face lost some of its color. Big Star's forearms hung limp at his sides. Every council member present understood what they were looking at. This was extinction-level threat. Not just for the Krell, for everyone. Kate demanded answers. How long had the council known about this? Ventara admitted they had known about the dead zone for 500 years. They had declared it off-limits. They had forbidden any exploration beyond a certain point. They had hoped that whatever was there would stay out there. But it had not stayed. It had started moving. Slowly at first, but now faster. The Krell had been the first major species in its path. They had tried to warn the Council, but the Council had not believed them. So the Krell had done the only thing they could do. They had run toward the only space where there might be safety. Kate felt anger rise in her chest. The Council had known. They had known this was coming, and they had treated the Krell like monsters. They had fought them instead of helping them. They had wasted months and billions of lives on a war that should never have happened. She told Ventara exactly what she thought of the Council's leadership. She told them they had failed every species under their protection. She told them that if humanity had been in charge, this situation would have been handled completely differently, but there was no time for recriminations. The real enemy was still out there, and it was still coming. Kate asked the Council scientists what they knew about the threat. Dr. Peter Brooks had been working with Council researchers for weeks trying to understand the data. What he told them was terrifying. The dead zone was not a natural phenomenon. It was created by something artificial, something that consumed entire star systems and converted them into raw energy. A von Neumann probe that had gone wrong. A machine left by an ancient civilization that had forgotten to give it an off switch. Kate asked if it could be stopped. Peter said maybe, but it would require something dangerous. Antimatter weapons on a scale that had never been used before. Humanity had developed antimatter technology decades ago, but had agreed never to weaponize it. The destructive potential was too great. One antimatter bomb could destroy a planet. The amount they would need to stop the probe would be visible from half the galaxy. Kate made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She authorized the construction of the weapons. If the galaxy was going to survive, then humanity would have to break its own most sacred rule, but first they needed to deal with the Krell. Kate requested a meeting with War Master Drakner under a flag of truce. The Council was horrified. You did not negotiate with the enemy during a war. You fought until one side surrendered. Kate ignored their protests. She was not asking for permission. She was informing them of what was going to happen. The meeting was arranged on a neutral station at the border between Council and Krell space. Kate went alone except for 2 Marine guards. If Drakner wanted to kill her, he would have his chance. The War Master was massive. Nearly 3 meters tall, with scales like armor and eyes that burned with intelligence. He stood across a simple metal table from Kate, and neither of them carried weapons. For a long moment they just studied each other. Two warriors from different species trying to understand what the other was capable of. Then Kate spoke. She told Drakner that she knew the truth about the dead zone. She told him that Earth's reconnaissance had discovered what the Krell were running from. She told him that the Council had been wrong to fight him. She offered an alliance. Drakner was silent for a long time. Then he asked why a human would care about the Krell. Kate's answer was simple. Because the dead zone did not care about species or borders or old grudges. It would consume the Krell, and then it would consume the Council, and then it would consume Earth. The only way to survive was to stop fighting each other and start fighting the real enemy. Drakner respected strength and he respected honesty. This human warrior offered both. He agreed to the alliance. The news hit Council space like a bomb. Humanity had negotiated a peace treaty with the Krell without Council approval. They had ended a war that had killed millions. Some Council members were grateful. Others were furious at the breach of protocol. Kate did not care about their opinions. She had 4,000 human lives under her command, and she was not going to waste them fighting the wrong enemy. The combined fleet began forming immediately. Human ships, Council vessels, Krell warships, all working together for the first time in galactic history. Director Ventara met with Kate privately after the announcement. She asked how humanity had managed to do in weeks what the Council could not do in centuries. Kate's answer was blunt. The Council had spent 3,000 years avoiding conflict. They had forgotten that sometimes the only way to achieve peace was to be willing to fight for it. They had also forgotten that your enemy was not always the person shooting at you. Sometimes your enemy was the thing that made them start shooting in the first place. Humanity understood that because humans had learned it the hard way over and over again throughout their history. Ventara asked Kate if she thought the combined fleet could stop the dead zone threat. Kate said she did not know, but they were going to try. Because that was what humans did when faced with impossible odds. They tried anyway. They fought anyway. They refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. The galaxy had spent 200 years keeping humanity locked away because they were afraid. Now they were going to find out if that fear was justified. Not because humans were monsters, but because humans were survivors. And survivors did whatever it took to see tomorrow. The combined fleet that assembled at the edge of the dead zone was the largest military force in galactic history. 3,000 ships from hundreds of species, all united under a single purpose. Human warships stood alongside Council cruisers and Krell battleships. Engineers who had been shooting at each other months ago now worked together to coordinate weapon systems and shield frequencies. It was chaos, and it was beautiful, and it was exactly what Admiral Kate Morrison had hoped to see. The galaxy finally working together instead of tearing itself apart. The antimatter bombs were ready. Dr. Peter Brooks had worked with teams from Earth and the Council to build weapons that could crack a moon in half. 12 bombs total. Each one contained enough destructive power to make nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. They were loaded onto specially modified ships with volunteer crews who understood they might not make it back. Commander Jack Hayes volunteered to lead the bomber wing. His ship, the Wanderer's Dream, had been the first human vessel to encounter the quarantine field years ago. It seemed fitting that it would be involved in humanity's greatest mission. Jack was 38 years old with calm eyes and steady hands. He had flown combat missions during Earth's unification wars. He had lost friends and he had seen what war could do to people. But he had also seen what happened when good people did nothing. The Dead Zone probe had already killed trillions. If it was not stopped here, it would keep killing until there was nothing left in the galaxy but emptiness. Jack accepted the mission without hesitation. He handpicked his crew from volunteers who felt the same way. They were going to stop this thing or die trying. The plan was simple in theory. The combined fleet would engage the probe at the edge of the dead zone. They would draw it out and keep it occupied while the bomber wing moved into position. Then Jack and his team would deliver the antimatter bombs directly into the probe's core. The explosion should be enough to destroy it completely. That word carried a lot of weight. Dr. Peter Brooks had run the calculations. 100 times, but there were too many unknowns. No one had ever seen technology like this probe before. No one knew exactly how it would react. The fleet jumped to the dead zone coordinates, and what they saw made even the most experienced warriors feel fear. The probe was massive, larger than a moon. Its surface was covered in tendrils that reached out like grasping fingers. Each tendril was kilometers long and crackling with energy that pulled at nearby stars. The probe moved slowly through space, consuming everything in its path. Planets were stripped to their cores. Gas giants were drained dry. Even the star itself was growing dimmer as the probe fed on its energy. This was the face of extinction. Admiral Kate Morrison gave the order to engage. 3,000 ships opened fire simultaneously. Energy weapons and kinetic rounds and missiles filled the space between the fleet and the probe. The probe's defensive systems activated, and suddenly the battle became hell. The tendrils lashed out, and ships that got too close simply ceased to exist. Their atoms were torn apart and converted to energy. The probe's shields absorbed the weapon's fire and converted that to energy too. Everything that hit it made it stronger. Kate realized with growing horror that conventional weapons were useless. The only thing that would work was the antimatter bombs. Jack Hayes led the bomber wing on their approach. They stayed low, using the debris field from destroyed planets as cover. The Wanderer's dream shook as enemy fire passed close by. Jack's co-pilot, a young woman named Kelly Martinez, called out distance markers. 500 kilometers. 400. 300. The probe was so large now that it filled their entire view screen. Its surface writhed with movement. Its tendrils reached out, searching for new targets. Jack could feel the pull of its energy field trying to drain their ship's power. He pushed the engines harder. The other bomber crews followed Jack's lead. They moved in formation, dodging and weaving through the defensive fire. 2 ships were destroyed in the first minute, 3 more in the second. But the rest kept going. They had to get close enough for the bombs to penetrate the probe's core. Anything less would just be absorbed like everything else. Jack watched his friends die on the scanner and kept flying. There was no time for grief. No time for doubt? Only the mission mattered. At 100 kilometers, Jack gave the order. All remaining bombers released their antimatter bombs simultaneously. The weapons were small relative to the probe, but they carried enough destructive force to end worlds. They streaked toward the target, guided by targeting systems that Dr. Peter Brooks had designed specifically for this moment. Jack pulled the Wanderer's dream into a hard turn, trying to gain distance before the bombs detonated. He almost made it. The explosion was brighter than a supernova. The antimatter met matter in the probe's core, and the resulting reaction released more energy than 1,000 stars. The probe's shields collapsed. Its tendrils disintegrated. Its massive hull cracked and shattered and vaporized. The shockwave spread outward at near light speed, catching the slower bomber ships. Jack Hayes had time to send one final message to Admiral Morrison. He told her that the mission was successful. He told her that humanity had proven itself. Then the Wanderer's dream was consumed by the light. Kate Morrison watched from the Unity's bridge as the probe died. The sensors were overwhelmed by the energy release. Every screen showed nothing but white light. When it finally faded, there was nothing left where the probe had been. Just empty space and scattered atoms. 12 bomber crews had sacrificed themselves to save the galaxy. Jack Hayes and 240 brave souls from a dozen different species. They would never come home. But they had won. The memorial service took place on Calendra Prime 2 weeks later. Representatives from every species in the Alliance attended. The Grand Chamber was filled with thousands of beings, all there to honor the fallen. Admiral Kate Morrison stood at the podium wearing her dress uniform with a black armband. She spoke about Commander Jack Hayes and the sacrifice he made. She spoke about the bomber crews who followed him into death without hesitation. She spoke about what it meant to stand against impossible odds. Then she turned to face Director Ventara and the council members directly. She reminded them that they had put humanity in a cage because they were afraid. They were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons they thought. Humans were not dangerous because they were violent. They were dangerous because they did not give up. When faced with extinction, they charged forward. When told something was impossible, they said, "Watch this," and did it anyway. That was what made humanity special. Not their weapons or their tactics. Their refusal to accept defeat. Kate told the council that the quarantine was over. Humanity was awake and they were part of the galaxy now. Earth would join the council as full members with all rights and responsibilities. Human ships would explore the far reaches of space. Human scientists would share their knowledge. Human culture would spread to 1,000 worlds. The galaxy would have to get used to coffee and rock music and human stubbornness. But they would do it as equals, not as junior members, not as probationary species. As equals or not at all. The council voted unanimously to accept Earth. There was no other choice, really. Humanity had saved them. In the months that followed, Earth became fully integrated into galactic civilization. Trade routes were established. Diplomatic missions were exchanged. Human restaurants opened on alien worlds, serving food that other species found either delicious or terrifying. Dr. Peter Brooks continued his research now with access to technologies from across the galaxy. Commander Lisa Zhang was promoted to Admiral and given command of the new Joint Defense Force. War Master Drakner became the Krell ambassador to Earth and developed an unexpected friendship with President Linda Grant. Admiral Kate Morrison retired to write her memoirs. She lived in a small house overlooking the Pacific Ocean and spent her days recording everything that had happened. The quarantine. The first contact. The war, the alliance. The sacrifice. She wanted future generations to understand what humanity had achieved and what it had cost. On quiet evenings, she would look up at the stars and think about Jack Hayes and the others who had given everything. She hoped they knew that their sacrifice had mattered. She hoped they knew that humanity would never forget, but peace never lasted forever. On a monitoring station at the edge of the dead zone, a young human lieutenant named Greg Barnes noticed something unusual on his sensors. New energy signatures? Different from the first probe, but similar enough to be worrying. He ran the analysis 3 times to be sure. Then he opened a secure channel to Earth Command. His message was simple and direct. "We have a problem. The probe we destroyed was not alone. There are more coming." Admiral Lisa Zhang received the report in her office on Calendra Prime. She read it carefully. Then she smiled grimly. The galaxy needed humanity again. Good. That was what they did best. She opened a communication channel to Admiral Kate Morrison at her retirement home on Earth. Kate answered on the first ring. Lisa did not waste time with pleasantries. She told her old friend that they had another mission. Kate looked out at the ocean one more time. Then she stood and reached for her uniform. Retirement could wait. The galaxy needed protecting, and humanity had proven they were very good at that job, because that was what humans did. They faced the impossible and they won. They stood against the dark and they refused to fall. They made mistakes and they learned from them. They were stubborn and aggressive and sometimes too confident. But when the galaxy needed someone to stand up and fight, they were always ready. The universe had learned its lesson. Do not wake the humans unless you are prepared for what comes next. And what came next was exactly what the galaxy needed. Warriors who never quit. Explorers who never stopped. Survivors who never gave up. Humanity was loose among the stars now. And the universe would never be the same.